Shadow of the Hitchhiker. It was a dark night with no moon somewhere in the Midwest. Sarah was driving home after a weekend spent at her grandparents' house. The country road stretched endlessly, surrounded by thick forests on both sides. The only sounds were the hum of the car and the rustle of leaves that came from the gusts of wind. The low fuel light on the dashboard was blinking. Sarah cursed quietly and glanced at her phone. There was no signal. Nothing could be seen ahead but darkness. Suddenly, as she rounded a corner, she saw a figure on the side of the road, illuminated by headlights. It was a hooded man, his face hidden by shadows. He held up a thumb, signaling that he needed help. Sarah faltered. Every warning she'd ever heard sounded in her head, but the man looked desperate. Against her inner voice, she stopped. The man opened the passenger door and got into the car without saying a word. "Where can I drop you off?" Sarah asked with a strained smile. "Just up ahead," he replied, his voice cold and detached. As they drove, Sarah noticed something odd. Although the man was sitting next to her, his reflection wasn't in the rearview mirror. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. "So, what brings you here so late?" She tried to make conversation. The man slowly turned his head toward her. "I could ask you the same thing." Sarah's heart beat faster. She laughed awkwardly. "Just driving home." The minutes dragged on interminably. The man didn't move, didn't fidget, just stared straight ahead. Finally, a gas station appeared ahead. Sarah breathed a sigh of relief. "I need gas," she said, turning away. The man nodded, but didn't get out of the car. She made her way outside, noticing that a single signal stick had appeared on her phone. She quickly texted her mother. "Strange hitchhiker. I'm at a gas station. Call me." Refueling the car, Sarah looked inside again. The man was no longer there. The passenger door was open wide, but there was no sign of him. Her relief didn't last long. When she got back behind the wheel, there was a small photograph lying on the passenger seat. It was of herself, taken as she was leaving her grandparents' house that morning. Panic-stricken, Sarah started the car and sped away. The road stretched ahead, but the air in the cabin grew heavier and heavier. Then she saw him again. He was standing on the side of the road, giving her a thumbs up. She drove past, refusing to stop, but after a few miles the engine stalled. Sarah tried desperately to start the car, but nothing worked. Then she heard it. A light tap on the window. Turning her head, she saw a man's face pressed against the glass, with a creepy smile that grew wider and wider. Sarah screamed, but the man only stretched his unnatural grin more. Her fingers trembled as she tried to unlock the doors, but the locks wouldn't budge. It seemed the car itself was against her. The man's whisper turned into a low, sinister laugh, and his shadow began to lengthen. It hissed as if it were alive, slowly creeping toward the car, dark tentacles reaching for Sarah. She grabbed her phone, but the screen showed only static. Meanwhile, the shadow came through the vents. The air in the car turned cold, and frost appeared on the windows. Darkness wrapped around her body, squeezing her chest. "You shouldn't have stopped," the man's voice echoed in the cabin, though he was no longer visible. He sat in the passenger seat, looking at her again with empty eyes. Before Sarah passed out, the man leaned closer and whispered one last thing. "You will drive for me now." When Sarah woke up, she was no longer behind the wheel. She was now standing on the side of the road. Her body felt heavy, foreign. In the distance, the headlights of a car were approaching. She raised her hand to stop it. Her reflection was nowhere to be seen. The cycle began again.